we've asked Christine Porter to give us a brief presentation entitled Triple Rigorous Research for Truth and Transformation. Let's give her a little bit of an introduction here. In 2018, Christine submitted to JAFSCD, and we published a paper entitled Triple Rigorous Storytelling, a PI's Reflections on Devising Case Study Methods with 5 Community-Based Food Justice Organizations. And I got to tell you, this was a stunningly candid self-reflection on her experience shepherding this multi-year, I don't know, was it 5 or 7 year, $5 million USDA funded action research project, which she called Food Dignity. She can tell us whether she coined that word or not. I think she did. But the Food Dignity project she worked with and learned from those leaders of the 5 justice community organizations was remarkable. What an ear and eyeful she got from that experience. And she bared it all with us in that paper. If you haven't had the chance to read it, it is a must read. And I think Amy's probably going to post it in the chat right now. But yeah, extraordinary paper, extraordinary woman, and it's an exemplary of how fearless Christine is. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to her. And Christine, thank you very much for joining us. Great to see you, bald head and all. You look beautiful.
Thanks.
And great to have you. Thanks.
Great to be here. I am so honored and grateful to get to talk with so many people who I admire personally or whose work I admire, capital W, social justice work I admire. So I'm going to talk today about what I call triple rigorous research for truth and transformation, and what each of these 3 kinds of rigor mean and why we want to combine them. Slide, please, Duncan. Thank you. So traditional academic rigor is epistemological rigor, where we're trying to systematically generate knowledge about reality or truth. And in that framework, conventional Western academic framework, ethics and values usually come last for just about how we are going to apply what we have learned, as opposed to shaping the rest of it as well. Next slide, please. So I argue that our actual research actually is and should be founded on our ethics and values first. What questions we ask, how we answer them, what we do with the results, and beyond. To give a horrific example of this would be the so-called Tuskegee study in the 30s. It was actually the National Public Health Service study. In the 30s, we enrolled about 600 men, all Black from Alabama, to do an academic study of what happens to people with syphilis when it's untreated, right? And like 10 to 15 years into that study, a cure, penicillin, was developed for syphilis and denied to the participants in that study up until 1972, the year after I was born. So the values, if I can use that word, underlying that were first and foremost white supremacy. Secondly, our over-prioritization of knowledge development for truth. If there had been any ethical or emotional rigor in the study, that would not have happened. The study wouldn't even have happened. A happier example I'll use to some extent today is Growing Resilience, which is a project that actually followed on from Food Dignity. I was working with a lot of partners in Wind River Indian Reservation, I was prioritizing their priorities of food sovereignty, including the means people were interested in was having home gardens, but not everyone had the means to start a home garden. So together we designed a study that was going to study the health impacts of home gardens and apply for money, which we got from NIH, to measure those impacts and also pay for the gardens. So we used epistemologically traditional academic rigor, where our main design was a randomized controlled trial of the home gardens with about 100 Eastern Shoshone and Northern Arapaho families. And we also used other methods, including talking circles, video storytelling, talking about the intergenerational resilience this created. And aside from how we disseminated that work, it was equally important to continue the work supporting gardens. And the community advisory board members we organized and have been part of the food sovereignty movement to this day. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the third kind of rigor, after ethical first and then epistemological, is emotional rigor. This is often the hardest for academics. There are at least 3 reasons for emotional rigor in our research. One is what Sandra Harding calls strong objectivity. She points out there is no such thing as a view from nowhere. If you are a human, you have a perspective and a lens and a framework and a life experience that's going to affect your work. And instead of pretending to ignore that and ignore our emotions, emotional rigor asks us to account for them, to name them, to share them, and in part for more epistemologically rigorous research. Next slide, please. Another reason for emotional rigor is what science philosopher Sean Wilson calls in his book, Research as Ceremony. He says that research is all about creating stronger relationships. That includes stronger relationships between each other, definitely requires emotional rigor, between us and knowledge, us and the systems and ecologies that we are part of, to create ever more rigorous and relevant knowledge. I will also add that he is one of only 2 philosophers I've heard use the word axiology for ethics that I talked about a second ago. And then next slide, please. And the third reason for emotional rigor in our work is that it leads to the strongest ethics. Our ethics are a lot more than our head, and it's our head and our heart and more. And we cannot be trustworthy in our work as partners or our outcomes, I believe, without strong ethics, which also requires an emotional rigor. Next slide, please. Thank you, Duncan. So taken together, this triple rigor, which might not even be grammatically correct, does 3 things that improve our research. One is it builds trust, trust between us and our partners, us and our participants, and just our own trustworthiness. Some academics talk about trust as if it's something that just builds naturally over time, but of course that is only true if you are trustworthy. So just doing work in this triply rigorous way makes you more trustworthy. It also makes your results more trustworthy. I'll use another example from Growing Resilience. Community health workers who were co-designing the survey for the randomized controlled trial with us about health impacts of gardens said that very often they would get slates of survey questions from researchers that they were supposed to ask their clients. And often these questions were inappropriate, including culturally. And so what the workers would do is change the question or omit it, but because of power relations, would still report results. And obviously those results were worse than junk. So aside from the ethical issues there, so trust in that, like even in that narrowest sense, is crucial for good epistemological or academic rigor. And getting more to the truth of answers to our questions, including, most of all, for finding, as someone said earlier, wicked solutions. I think Tricia said that, right? This kind of triply rigorous research, I would say, is essential for any research that's with stakeholders about them and ideally with them as partners. And it is the only kind of rigor that would really be effective with complex problems and especially what we call wicked problems. And in order to do research that's going to lead to transformation, that is transformation of ourselves individually, as in this quote here, of our institutions that we work for and with, including to be better partners in this work for transformative work. And next slide, please. That in our work, right, most or all of us are trying to transform food systems that nourish so that they can nourish and will nourish everybody now and in the future, to take what we have and transform it into something much more equitable. Finally, on this, I would say that the philosopher Thomas Kuhn has talked about scientific revolutions and how we do research that happen periodically. I would argue that we are in the midst of one that is much more welcoming and supportive and fundable, I will also say, of this kind of work, that this is where we are headed. And I am so grateful to JAFSCD for being a part of that revolution, and to all of you as part of JAFSCD for doing that. And I have my sources slide, and thank you so much for this chance to talk about this. I get so excited.
We all do. I'm sure people are getting tingles in their spines from this presentation. What a privilege it was to be able to hear you present this. And I would ask that if anybody has questions, and I'm sure there are questions or comments people would like to share, please put those in chat now. If we have time before the end of the meeting, we might come back to that. And if we could have a minute with Christine to answer those. And if not, we will be passing those questions and comments on to Christine. She may be able to follow up at a future point, if that would be okay with you, Christine.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.